Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from simpleprogrammer.com. So I've got another interview for you all today. And this one I've been wanting to do for a while. I know some of you have requested that I get Haseeb Qureshi on here, and I do have him today, and it's one of those interviews that I've been looking forward to because I think we share quite a bit of background. Haseeb having been a professional poker player, probably more so of a professional poker player than I ever was, but I did play poker online for a living for a while, a short time before the whole thing blew up. But yeah, I thought this would be kind of interesting. And Haseeb has quite an interesting background. He's done quite a few things in his career, and now I believe you're working at Airbnb. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm now a software engineer for Airbnb.
Awesome. So actually, rather than me trying to patch together, your history,
Yeah.
maybe, well, first of all, welcome and thank you.
It's a pleasure to be on, and I'm glad we had this chance to talk.
Yeah, so maybe you can fill in the gaps and talk about like what is your background? What is your story?
Totally. Well, in the interest of brevity, I'll give you the very, very short version.
Mm.
So I used to be a professional poker player. I started playing when I was 16 years old, and my professional career lasted until I was 21. I stopped playing poker when I was 21. There was about a span of 5 years where I did a bunch of different things. One of them was I wrote a book. I went back to school. Because I withdrew from school while I was playing poker professionally. I also gave away all the money that I made as a poker player.
Wow.
And so I'm 27 now, and about a year and a half ago, slightly more than a year and a half ago now, I decided that, well, actually, I should rewind a little bit more than that. I decided that I wanted to earn to give, which is something that we might end up talking about later. But essentially what that entailed was trying to earn a high income career. And so I decided that I wanted to go into the tech industry. I had no training as a programmer. I hadn't really done any programming before at all, although I was fairly tech savvy. I decided then to enter into a coding bootcamp, which I did April last year. Is that right? Yes, that is right. April last year, I entered into a coding bootcamp. I moved from Austin to San Francisco. I graduated from that coding bootcamp. I became an instructor at the coding bootcamp pretty immediately afterwards. They then promoted me to director of product, which I did for about 9 months. And then after I left, I did a crazy job search that ended up going viral when I wrote about it afterwards. And I got a job as a software engineer at Airbnb, and that's where I work now.
Awesome. Wow. There's a lot of things to unpack here. I think, I mean, that's just a really cool story. It's kind of interesting. Like the thing I love about when I saw your story originally was this idea, because so many people don't realize that, like, if you're a hard worker and you're intelligent and you apply yourself, there's really no limit. There's no limit to what you can do. I mean, the fact that you went from, I've got a video on my channel where people just get so upset because I say, oh, I could learn anything in 3 months. And they don't get it because they haven't seen people do it. But you're like, the fact that you could go to a boot camp, you said April of last year, and legitimately, I would, again, I haven't seen your code, but I would assume, just based on knowing the kind of person that you are, that you're probably a better programmer than a lot of programmers who've been doing it for 10 years. And you've only been, and it's just because so many people don't actually really deeply apply themselves. The fact that you could become an instructor. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think makes it, or I mean, or correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but
yeah. So
yeah,
I have a couple thoughts actually on that, on this thread that you're bringing up. So the first thing is that I think, take a programmer who's been programming for 10 years, right? Very likely they are very good at something that I'm not very good at, right? And probably a lot of things that I'm not very good at. And very likely I'm also very good at things that they're not very good at, right? Like the space of if you imagine what it means to be a good programmer, it's very easy to think along this one-dimensional track, like running or something, right? Or like, sprinting. But being a software engineer is nothing like sprinting. Like there's no single measure of what makes a good software engineer, especially because there's so many different jobs and so many different roles that fall under the header of software engineer.
Right.
And so, you know, being that I entered this game, you know, April last year, essentially. That's when I started really developing myself as a software engineer. And so it was kind of, you know, the way that I approached it is that I wanted to take the straightest line from the starting point to becoming good enough to be a professional software developer at a top tech company, right?
Right.
And if my goals were different, I would have learned very different things. And so I think, you know, I think if most people, even people who are maybe more experienced and aren't as familiar with a lot of the, you know, newer technologies that are coming out that I was trained on, I don't think the difference is really that, you know, there's something special about me or that I have some, you know, special innate ability that other people don't have. I think it's more that I started from a very, very goal-directed place of what I wanted to learn, and
Right.
I just, you know, I just learned the shit out of that one thing. And
Exactly.
I think if that's the approach that you take, then you're much more likely to end up being successful at learning that particular thing. But learning doesn't just happen for free. Like you don't just get it because you're working hard. You know,
Right.
most people work hard at the thing they're working on. You know, but they don't optimize their process for learning,
Right.
and that I think is probably one of the big differences. So if I had to answer the question, which was I think sort of implied earlier, was why do you think you were able to become an instructor so quickly and like learn so quickly? I think it's because I really, really focused on the process of learning.
Right.
And that's something that from my time as a poker player, I kind of learned how to learn. Because really becoming a good poker player is, I mean, becoming a poker player is so different than becoming a programmer because in the world of poker, there are no professors, you know, there are
Right.
no, like, there's
What about
no
Howard
school.
Lederer?
Yeah, no, like it's everything that people are selling you that's a school,
Yeah.
at least that was back at the time that I was a professional poker player, was bullshit. You know,
Right.
everything that was structured and like could be handed to you was snake oil, like
Right.
almost certainly. And so if you wanted to become a good poker player, you had to, you know, you were your own professor, right? Like you had to go out and find the information and teach yourself. And you know, you couldn't trust anyone, right? You
Right.
couldn't trust that any received knowledge was actually good because in the world of poker, there's a lot of protecting information, right? It's kind of
Right.
not like a lot of other domains where the way that you learn best practices and the way that you learn, you know, what's good and what's bad is by, you know, following or reading the people who are the best. In poker, at least in the time that I was playing, you couldn't really do that because
Right.
the people who were the best weren't sharing what they were doing. And the people who were sharing what they were doing were usually the people who were bullshit artists and who weren't good enough to just make money actually playing poker. And so I think, you know, for at least the generation of poker players around the time that I was coming up, uh, the people who ended up becoming really good were the people who learned how to learn.
Exactly.
And I think that's a skill that I've really, really, you know, has transferred fairly well into other domains. And
Yeah.
so, you know, a lot of stuff that I did as a programmer, other people didn't have the instinct to do. And I think a lot of those things probably added up in
Yeah.
the long run of learning.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you say learning how to learn, that's something that I'm super big on. I put
Mm,
together in fact one of my courses is 10 ways to learn anything quickly, and it's about learning how to learn. I when I do talks, I talk about that being the most valuable skill that you can possibly have in your life is learning how to learn. So I totally agree with you. And it's kind of interesting too. I think also, you know, drawing a parallel to poker, like when I was teaching myself poker, a lot of things that we learn in life, we learn by like by results. So we're like, okay, I did this thing and I got a good result, so it's but poker is one of those things that you have to divorce yourself from the results and say,
right.
no, I'm going to follow this thing. And sometimes when when there's four to the flush and I draw, I'm going to lose, even though I made the right statistically correct, that I made a positive EV move,
Yeah.
but I got slapped on the wrist for it. And then sometimes when you make the wrong moves, you win. And
Right.
so you've
Right.
got to like, but some, like for me at least, I found that that same kind of thinking, like I could take that exact same thing that made me good at poker, the divorcing myself from the results, trusting the process, understanding and learning that way, and apply it to stock market and to programming eventually when I was learning things, because so many people learn by what feels good. That's
Right.
like our natural, but you have to fight that, and that seems like an accelerated course.
Well, it's interesting though, right? Because I think so. Programming is certainly a lot more deterministic than poker. Right? In poker,
Right,
you're absolutely right, where you cannot just directly one for one trust the feedback that poker is giving you, because sometimes when you win, you've made the wrong play, and
right,
sometimes when you lose, you've made the right play. And if you just let poker calibrate you, like if you know, you can imagine like poker essentially being your teacher and you listening wholeheartedly to everything poker's saying. If you just accept on the face, okay, when things go bad, I'm going to do less of that. When things do well, I'm going to do more of that. There's so much noise and so much randomness that like you're just going to suck as a player if you cannot see through it.
right,
Uh, in programming, on the other hand, like the program either runs or it doesn't. It's either
right.
correct or it doesn't, right? Like in a way, in a sense, you could say that there's no noise in the feedback that a program gives you about whether or not it works. But I think, but I don't think that's the end of the story, because one thing that you don't always get feedback on, and quite often you don't, is not just whether the code runs or not, but whether your process in writing that code was good, right?
Exactly.
And whether the code that you wrote is actually well written, whether it's maintainable, whether it's decomposed effectively, right? All of those things, the program is not going to tell you whether you did that right or wrong. All the program will tell you is whether your output is correct. And
Exactly.
one of the things that I remember when I was going through boot camp is that I was obsessive relative to other people about the process and how well we were writing the code, as opposed to just ensuring that the output was correct.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's something that it's really hard to learn that late.
Yes.
If you don't start and go through your entire process of being a programmer, constantly thinking about this sort of stuff and giving yourself feedback, especially soliciting feedback from others if they're able to give it to you. But if they're not able to give it to you, give yourself that feedback, and to trust that feedback over and above, does the program run or not? Right?
Right.
There are times when the program runs and the code you've written is shitty, and there are times the program doesn't run and actually the code you've written is great. You just got to figure out what that bug is that's preventing this program from being correct.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very true. And it, it's kind of interesting. I think a lot of beginner programmers don't realize that the code is written for humans, because
Right.
that's the primary consumption, is like, the difference between the code being good or bad is how well can someone else understand that
Totally.
code, because it's making it correct is one thing, but actually writing good code that someone would want to hire you for, and in the long-term maintenance of the application is going to be based on how readable that code is, how understandable, how
Right.
much.
Yeah,
But
that's one thing that working at Airbnb is kind of has somewhat surprised me, is
mm,
that I've realized how exactly along the lines of what you're saying, how much more important it is to, I mean, code is written once, maybe twice, and then read 100 times, and
yeah,
50 of those times are probably going to be by you, but 50 of those times are also going to be other people who are going to have to be fixing your shit when you're not there. So
exactly.
uh, it it's so much more the case than I think I even knew before I started working in an actual in an industry job, that the thing that matters most in code that you write for production is whether another programmer can understand and debug it on its face, right? Basically, it's so much more important than performance. It is
Exactly.
readability, understandability, testability, um, and like like that's always a very explicit trade-off that you have to decide to make. Of, hey, I'm going to make this harder to understand in order to make it perform better, in order to do X or Y or Z, right? Like that's always the first consideration: is could someone else understand and change this easily?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's very true. I think that's what, and it's one of those things where when I interview programmers, when I look at their code, I can look at someone's code in like 10 minutes and I can get a pretty good idea, like a 90% of how good they are just based on how readable their code is. Because I know, you look at that code and you're like, okay, this person, I don't really need to, like, I'm gonna test them technically, but if I'm seeing this level of understandability in the code, it sort of indicates that they know a lot more
Right.
depth than that. That somehow if you've reached that point, you've probably got the rest of the package.
Totally, totally. It
And
reminds me, in a way, I think it's very analogous to writing, right? Just
mhm,
like writing English. There's this quote that I think is something of a misquote, but I think originally it's Oscar Wilde or somebody who they wrote a letter to somebody and they said it was some long rambling letter and they say, I apologize for the length of this letter because I didn't have time to make it short.
exactly. Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing in programming, right? Like when you read somebody and they've written some code or they've added some feature, and the code is just super short and easy to understand, you're like, this must be a really good programmer, because what I think what a lot of newer programmers tend to mistake is complexity for skill. Usually, if something that you've made is very complex, it's probably bad, and it's
Exactly.
probably adding more technical debt than it's actually solving problems. Now that's obviously not always true, and anytime that I make a generalization like that, like yes, there's going to be some core algorithm in your app that just runs hundreds of thousands of times per minute or per second, and that needs to be optimized like crazy. And that's totally the case in a lot of domains, but especially in web development, most of the time, especially if you're in a larger team, most of the time these things roughly hold true. That you
Right.
want to first be thinking about readability before you even start contemplating what you can do to optimize something, especially when you're not even sure that it's going to be a performance bottleneck, which is
Right.
often hard to know until you actually productionize it, or you have a better idea of like what the access patterns are going to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even in the complexity, right? When things are there's still simplicity within the complexity. I think in a good design,
Yeah.
right? Because
Mhm.
a well designed automobile, for example, you open up the hood and like all the cables are nicely
Right. Right.
it's a complicated piece of machinery. Like this is not a simple thing, but every single component is simple and streamlined. And like you if you break it down, if you look at every abstraction, that all of those things are simple, so you can
Right.
understand the bigger picture. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, software at its heart is complex, right? It's like, but the question is, can you dig in there and get it? And is it simple? Like, are the abstractions at such a level that you have logical steps to go from one place to the other and understand what you're doing?
Yeah. I think that's a great analogy, and I completely agree.
So one thing I want to ask you, well, out of curiosity, did you ever play Magic the Gathering, the
I did
card game?
not actually. I have some close friends who did, but I did not personally.
Because there's kind of an interesting connection here because I found, and I thought it was funny because I had a background I played Magic the Gathering professionally for a while, and I know a
Okay.
lot of poker players did, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of people jump, and then a lot of them actually became software developers or were software developers, either Magic the Gathering players or poker players. So there's kind of this connection, and I think that there's some, or actually, the trading, Wall Street trading part of it too, doing a
Right.
complex option trading or hedge funds.
Mhm.
There's another kind of overlap. So I think there's kind of this thing, which I wanted to get your take on it, of and I kind of suspect it too, like the fact that you're able to accelerate so quickly in this field. It
Mhm.
almost feels to me like if you master one thing, and these are things that have to be mastered, like Magic the Gathering or poker, or you can't just be good at these things, otherwise you're horrible, right? You have to become you have to master these things in order to actually continue. So it seems like that mastery carries over, and maybe is related to learning how to learn. But have you noticed that, like, that as you master more and more things, like
Mhm.
to that level that most people never attain, that
Right.
other things become easier for you, even then when they're totally unrelated, at least at a surface level?
So I think that's true, and some of that I would attribute to, like I said, learning how to learn, and also
Mhm.
being familiar with the process of mastery, right? Where the hard part at the beginning, where you're just getting in tons of raw experience and kind of calibrating your senses, right? Like to me, being that I have gone through that process already,
Right.
I'm kind of not really surprised, right? Or sort of, I'm much less likely to hit a roadblock and be like, oh crap, I'm not, I'm learning at a different rate now. Things are changing. I'm now worried that I'm not learning as fast. Um, for me, like I just have total confidence in the process that I went through. That I just know if I do these things, I'm going to get good. I don't know how
Right.
good, but I know that I'm going to get good in what I think is roughly the fastest and densest, way possible. Um, so I think there is that. Uh, I think another element is that it's certainly true that in a domain like Magic the Gathering or in poker or in quantitative hedge funds or whatever, right? Like when you're in a very analytical domain,
Mhm.
and you like, I think poker, Magic, chess. These are all good examples of games that are very very analytical and that reward and train you to think in just a pure, rigorous, and kind of unself-conscious way, where
Right.
like it's not about you, it's about the game, it's about what's in front of you, right? It sort
Right.
of takes you out of yourself. And I think if you just do that, if you just do the shit out of that for years, you become very good at that skill.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I think a lot of beginner programmers have a lot of trouble with, which is like, when you're programming, I think when you're a beginner and you're programming, uh, it's super easy to get emotional, right?
Yeah.
When the code isn't running, it's not doing what you want, you can't figure out what this bug is, right? And I think when you work in one of these domains, and you gain mastery of chess or poker or whatever, you just learn to like kind of lose yourself to the game and
Right.
totally trust what it's saying, right?
Yep.
So like in poker, I mean, it's not that when I say that, what I don't mean is that okay, the game is always right in the feedback it's giving me, but the game is always the game. The game, like I don't get to control anything.
Right.
I don't get to control whether I win a chess match. Chess decides that. I don't get
Right.
to control whether I get a good hand. Poker decides that. And in the same way, I don't get to decide whether the code runs. The compiler decides that, or the
Exactly.
the interpreter decides that.
Yeah. It's
And
not personal.
yeah, exactly. It's not personal, right? It's not about you. It's
Yeah.
about the process that you're undergoing. And you just keep tinkering and you keep working until the system gives you, like it unlocks the door.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of these domains, you just get used to that. You develop that virtue. Um, so that I think is another thing. And the last thing that I'd say is that it probably just selects for the same kinds of people, who are the kinds of people who are good at going deep down a rabbit hole and becoming very very um, just like going into their flow of really really deeply trying to analyze this one thing and then getting really good at it, right? Like I mean, obviously I think it selects for a certain type of person who is very analytical and who is able to delve deep into a particular topic at the and kind of shut off a lot of other noise. And that's, I think, again, it's somewhat hard for people to do that, for the average person.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that what you said, the especially, one of the things that I was actually going to ask you about too, because I found that this is, at least, this has been my experience when I was playing poker or Magic or even trading stocks, is that there were people that knew, like, at the top level, 99% of the people know the correct strategy or know just close to optimal strategy.
Right,
But what made the best, but more than, but maybe 99% of people couldn't execute because of emotions.
right.
And that seems like that's, like a prerequisite. Like I found that, I had to really develop a stoic philosophy in life in order to be good at poker. And I was beating people that had more experience and more knowledge than me, but it was because I could execute, because I could do it emotionlessly, because I could not go on tilt. And the same thing I
Right.
found in doing real estate investment or stocks, or and the parallel to software development. So I was curious about what you thought about the emotional mastery and the stoic kind
Mhm.
of how that may have benefited your life.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that in order to succeed at the highest levels in most of these domains, you need to have some emotional self mastery, and this is not something that most it's not something that you'll just learn in life. Like you will not learn how to do that unless life kind of demands it from you.
Right.
And I think there are pretty few people who I know who haven't done something like competed at a very high level in a particular field, who have anywhere near that level of emotional self-mastery. Um, and I think it's very hard to get.
Yep.
And there are very few things that actually train it to a significant degree. I do think that it helps a lot. Like I'm somebody who now, this many years later in my own personal development, um, like it's pretty hard to phase me.
Yeah.
Like when something goes wrong, when something is bad. One thing that I learned from poker at a very early age, I mean, I was, 16, 17, 18 years old when I was losing tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a given
Yeah.
in a day, in a night. And, you know, I think one of the things you learn is you don't just learn that it doesn't really matter in the long run. That's one thing you learn, because these things happen and they happen and they happen, and it never kills you. You
Right.
always go on, and you always wake up the next day and you can go back at it again. Um, but the other thing that you just realize is that everything is transient. Like
Yeah.
no matter how bad you feel like your loss today was, you know, it tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, a week from now, you're gonna barely even remember that it happened, and that's
Exactly.
going to be your new normal. That's going to be your new here. And I guess the just having faith in your own power to habituate and to
Yes.
just get used to the new environment that you're into. So when I was doing my job search, right, part of the reason why, and if people haven't read, you might want to look up this blog post that I wrote that went viral after I got a job at Airbnb. It was called or I think it's Farewell App Academy, Hello Airbnb, where I basically talked about the my job search process. And in that job search process, I thought I was hot shit, right? Like I had, risen in this coding boot camp. I was the top of my class. I became an instructor. I did all this stuff, and I was like, man, I am good. I know my shit. I feel really confident. I've been honing this set of skills, and I'm pretty sure, given that like I've been training students on going through job interviews,
Yeah.
and like that I will be totally fine and that I'll be able to get a job easily in industry. And what I found was that initially that was not at all the case,
Right.
because every single company that I applied to, I mean, looking at my resume of,
Yeah.
being this like, so I studied English and philosophy in school. And I had a super weird background. I used to be a poker player, and I wrote a book. And then I was, did a coding boot camp, but then I'm director of product, which is like not an obviously technical role. And so I'm pretty sure that they just saw my resume and then just directly transferred it to the trash can. Uh,
Exactly.
and so, that I remember really, really rattled me when I saw that nobody was interested in giving me a chance. Nobody was interested in even seeing whether I could do a programming interview. Whether I was good enough to even make their bar. Um, and I remember, like some night when getting, the 30th rejection, that feeling like shit, like I'm not able to pierce through this wall. Like there's nothing I can do to get people to acknowledge that I can do this. Like
Right.
I might just not even have a chance. Um, and the thing is, I think about emotional self mastery, and I think about tilt, right? So, what I guess one thing I don't think I mentioned is that after I quit poker, I worked for a while as a mental coach to other professional poker players, where I
Oh, interesting.
basically, yeah, so I basically coached them on the psychological side of poker. So a lot of the stuff about emotional self mastery, trying to construct a good regimen for learning and for structure in the way you pursue poker. So one of the things that I kind of knew was that I was sort of used to, well, what do I want to say? I guess the way that I put it is that, like, the thing about people who are good at resisting tilt is not that they don't feel the tilt in the first place, right? Like that's
Right.
what a lot of people misunderstand about emotional self mastery, is they think it's not feeling emotions.
Right. You're
And
right.
that's not a thing. There's no
Right.
one who doesn't feel emotions. There's no one who doesn't feel a punch in the stomach when they lose a huge pot, or when they get, don't pass an interview, or when, they get torn up in a code review or whatever, right? Everybody feels that. The question and the difference is what you do once you realize you're having that feeling.
Right.
So the difference between somebody who has really strong emotional self mastery is the relationship to their emotions, not the emotions that they have.
Right.
So I totally felt scared and feelings of self doubt, and like I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to do this. And I just knew that those feelings were transient and those feelings were going to go away. And it didn't really matter whether I had those feelings. The thing I should do was still the same, which is, go to bed, next morning, wake back up and go back at it and just
Yep.
keep going, and that's almost always the answer, right? Is just
Exactly.
wake up the next day, throw some cold water on your face and get back out there and keep grinding. Because if you have confidence in your process, then you just know that even though, I lost this pot, it sucks. I lost a lot of money, but I know that I'm doing the right thing. And
Yep.
it doesn't really matter what poker tells me. And in the same way, whether I won or lost, in the same way, it kind of doesn't really matter what the job market tells me, whether I got this job or not. I know the answer is still go out there and keep hustling and keep doing what I need to do in order to make sure that it happens for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things I always talk about is it's simple program is trusting the process, because I feel like that's so important, the ability to divorce the results from the from the process. Once you know that the process, this is eventually going to work logically,
Right.
and it doesn't mean that you're just like blindly following the thing. You're going to change the strategy, but you're going to respond instead of react. Whereas most people react, they're like, oh, I feel bad, so I'm going to quit. Right. And it's like, no, quitting can be a logical decision or changing course, but it's like, where is it coming from? Is it coming from that, like you said, that stomach punch where you're like, oh, okay, so that's why you're not, or even just, you're not going to the gym this morning is because you don't feel like going to the gym, or you're not going for that run, or is it because you've logically decided that you actually need more rest? And there's a huge difference there.
Totally.
That's that's really interesting. I also think to kind of bridge into something that I found also is one thing that came up while we were talking about that is one of the turning point for me in poker was actually this point where I was losing money. I wasn't getting good. I was reading a lot of books and stuff, and I kept on putting like $200 on my account, right, on my online account. And then one day I was like, you know what, John, no more. You've got 15 cents on your account right now. That's what you got.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm going to grind my way up from 50. I was playing penny on the penny tables, right? And I ground my way up to $50,000 on the account from 15 cents. And because that's where I got the emotional resilience. That's where I was like, because I had to lower myself, because I was used to playing, I was putting $200 on my account and playing $50 tournaments. And I had to like get to the point where it's like, okay, it's not about the feeling, it's about the execution.
Right.
And I felt like that was a huge benefit for me.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point. And this is actually another principle that I've kind of learned to live by, I think, from the time that I was a poker player. A lot of people ask me when they hear my story of like, wow, you were so you're so hardworking, how did you believe in yourself so much, or I don't know, stuff like this that just totally doesn't even make sense to me when I hear stuff like that. Because to me, I know that I am a coward. Like, I know that I am fearful. I know that I am not going to do the hard thing if I'm given a choice not to, right?
Right.
The way I deal with that is I engineer my environment to not give me that choice.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
The way that I see it is that I am only a person who accomplishes fucking anything because I don't give myself the choice not to.
Right.
And so it's like the analogy that I often tell people is just I lock myself in a room and throw away the key because I know if I have that key with me, I'm gonna use it to unlock the door and get out of the fucking room because I don't want to be there.
Exactly.
And so I think there's so much value and drive and power that comes from necessity. Just like for you, when you were like, I'm not going to deposit anymore, and so I just have to do what it takes to grind up these 15 cents and not lose them. When I started playing poker, I was 16 years old. I was underage, and I actually found this online promotion that would give me $50 to start my career with. And so actually what happened was there's this bonus with Party Poker, which is a site that was open to US players back then in 2006 or 7. And you had to scan in your driver's license and they would give you $50 to like start gambling,
Oh yeah.
But I didn't have a driver's license. I was 16. And so what I did is I went on Google Images, and this is like back in 2006. So you could just like find a driver's license that wasn't blurred out or anything.
Nice.
So I found it was like some old lady from Maryland. And that was the only driver's license I could find. And that's how I started my career, was with these $50. And I could not deposit. Like
Yeah.
there was no way for me to get more money. And so
Right.
I just had to very meticulously grind up these $50 slowly but surely. And, I started at the 5 cent, 10 cent games and worked my way up until, after about a year, I think I turned that $50 into over $100,000. And like, I did that because I had to,
Yeah.
I had no choice. And I'm almost certain that if I had the ability to just like deposit another $10 or $20, I wouldn't have done that with the same amount of rigor. And it's kind of the same
Exactly.
way where, how did I learn how to program so quickly? Well, I moved out to San Francisco with no option but
Yeah.
to become a good programmer. Otherwise, I was just going to starve and, pay myself into bankruptcy on rent. So that's what made it happen, you know? And so I think finding circumstances like that you can engineer into your life
Yep.
that force you to do the thing that you'd otherwise wouldn't do. I think that's an extremely valuable and often overlooked skill of people who end up becoming successful at things
Exactly.
quickly.
Yeah, yeah, I call it burning the boats, where you've got
Ah,
no, you got no off, you got no retreat. You gotta move forward. And I actually facilitate my whole life kind of around, I set rules for myself. So like, I eat one meal a day,
mm,
and I've been doing that for a long time. And it's like people are, is that hard? It's like, well, it would be hard if I had to make the decision every day whether I was going to do it or not. But
right,
because I've
right.
made it a rule in my life, and
Mm,
the same thing with my workouts, it's like there's not an option.
yeah,
I don't have to make decision. When you go to eat lunch and you're like, should I go with my friends and go to Burger King, or should I eat this, or eat the salad that I packed? You got to
right,
make a decision. I don't make a decision because
yeah,
I know that I suck at I have weak willpower, just like
right, right.
everyone else. But I just remove
Uh,
as many decisions from my life as possible and script it,
yeah,
and plan ahead. And then and again, I guess I probably got that from Magic the Gathering and poker, like, because
mm,
with poker I had to have the plan. I know I know what's going to happen in this situation. I know I've thought about it ahead of time.
right,
Not because when you think about things, when you have the emotion attached, you don't make clear decisions. You make bad
totally,
decisions.
yeah.
So but so one thing also that I think is interesting. I wanted to segue as we wrap up here into the whole the kind of altruism, the effective altruism,
Yeah.
because that's another thing. Like one thing I started doing, I guess it's been like 10 years ago. I mean, I don't give you give away a lot more, but I've been giving 10% of everything that I earn to orphans in India. And just as a like I do that not even out of a religious thing, but just out of um just wanting to make a difference, like, and also just the benefit that I get from being able to let go of things, and not hold on to them so tightly, because I have this abundant, and I did this when I wasn't making a lot of money, and then when I became a millionaire, I still continued to do this, and it became a lot more money. But I'm curious how that is, well, maybe if you could talk about what you're doing, but how that
Sure.
kind of plays into all this. Because for me, it was very connected. It was like, once I
Mm,
realized, like you said, it's like it, I don't know, that I could, it could, tomorrow's going to come and I have the same opportunity. Like, making money is not hard
mm.
per se. Like, it's not a limited, I guess it's an abundance mindset, and this kind of keeps me in it. What's your thoughts? Like, what's your psychology behind all this? Why did you get started doing that? And I don't know, just
Right.
your kind of.
Yeah, yeah. So, so I think the germ of what really a lot of these and basically giving to charity in my relationship with altruism. I mean, it really started when I decided to give away my money,
Mhm.
and it was something on the order of about $500,000 that I'd saved up from my career as a poker player. And I lived off that for about 5 years, and then I decided to give it away. And a lot of the premise of me doing that, I mean, one was that feeling that, for one, I didn't feel like I needed that money. In a way, it felt almost like that money was holding me back from actually being uh, kind of fully self-reliant and challenged. Like, you can't really burn that boat if that boat is $500,000 wide. You know what I mean?
If it's a yacht.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Right? Like, you're not
Yeah.
going to burn a yacht very effectively, or something's probably going to go wrong if you do that.
Yeah.
But so that was part of it, and it was also wanting to not live in the shadow of something that I had done as a teenager, right? Like
Oh,
always feeling like this thing that I did when I was, 18, 19 and a professional poker player, making all this money and being really successful is like the best thing I'm gonna ever do. And I was like, fuck that. I have to throw that away and be totally confident that what poker gave me is the learning and the knowledge and the self-mastery that I take with me somewhere else.
Right.
It's not the money that matters. And then the last thing that really affected me was realizing how much, and I think, I learned this lesson at an early age, but how much money does not bring happiness.
Yes.
Like I think especially being young and being a successful, making a lot of money at a young age, it's just so obvious looking around at the environment of people who earn a lot of money that there's no connection past the very minimal threshold of wealth between money and happiness. And so if you just know that, like, for me, I just know that, like, my happiness is not at all fungible through money. Like I cannot trade money for happiness. Like there's no way to do that for me. I just honestly don't need that much. And I just know enough about myself to know that I'm just not particularly materially motivated. So what that means for me is that, one, it doesn't really matter that much to me to have money. And the other thing you have to come to appreciate is how powerful money is in many other parts of the world and in many other places and in many other domains. And so, donating money to, somewhere in Africa where, people live off of less than $1 a day, right? $1,000 of a donation is like doubling somebody's annual salary, which is an insane amount of impact that you can have with an amount of money that might seem, not trivial, but not life-changing to somebody in the West. And so realizing just how much more impact and how much the work that you do can reduce the suffering in the world, that eventually led me to learning about effective altruism. And so effective altruism is this movement that came out of Oxford and Cambridge in like the early 2010s, basically. It kind of started fairly recently. And the whole idea of effective altruism is basically being rigorous and scientific about the way that you are altruistic, right? So instead of just kind of doing things to feel good or doing things that sound good or that are impressive to people or that give you this sort of warm glow on the inside of like, hey, I'm helping, but instead helping people with the same rigor and intensity that we treat, science, or the way that we treat, anything else that you'd spend tons of money on, or like a business investment, where you really, like, the burden of proof is very high, and you just need to leverage actual evidence in order to say, hey, I think this is a good charity to give to. Because the reality is, and this is very counterintuitive, but the reality is that most charities are not very effective.
Right.
Even
it's
if
very
they're,
true.
and so, and what people think that means is they think that means that, like, oh, well, that means that they're spending a bunch of money on their staff, or it means that they're, I don't know, siphoning away funds or something like that. That's not what that means. An organization can spend a lot on its staff and still be really effective, or it can spend almost nothing on its staff and be totally ineffective, right? The thing that matters is, per dollar fundraised, what actually happens?
Right.
Who gets helped, and how much do they get helped? Right? That is the only question that actually matters. So when you're judging a business, nobody looks at a business and says, like, oh, okay, they donate, they give 30% of their income they pay to their employees, so therefore it's a badly run business, right? Nobody even thinks that it's a meaningful thing to even compare businesses on. What matters is how much they're actually producing the thing they're producing. And so for a charity, it's exactly the same way, where doesn't matter how much of their percentage of the funds is going to X, Y, or Z. What matters is how much impact are they having. And so one of the ideas that came out of effective altruism was this idea of earning to give.
Right.
And this was around 2013, 2014 when I was learning about this, and I was really uncertain what I wanted to do with my life. So this is shortly after I gave away my money. I had written this book about poker, and I knew I wanted to move forward and figure out what the next thing was going to be, and I wasn't really sure what it was. And this idea of earning to give is basically this. I'll give you the sort of short spiel. The idea is that if you are somebody in the first world and you're somebody who's fairly intelligent, you're educated, you're free, you're not burdened by ill health or a lot of these other things that it's going to make your life a lot more challenging and limit your economic mobility. You actually have relatively unfettered access to some of the most amazing wealth on planet Earth, right? And that's actually really weird, it's really weird that it's as easy as it is. Like for someone like me who doesn't have any, I didn't go to, Yale. I didn't, study some, really highly valuable thing in school. Like I have none of the credentials that someone probably should have in order to have easy economic mobility, but I just do because I'm a relatively intelligent person and I live in the United States. And that's
Exactly.
right. There's really nothing else that I need in order to have access to some of the most lucrative markets on planet Earth. And
Right.
if you're somebody who's just born in some random country, in the Eastern Hemisphere, it doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how much you want it. It is just closed off to you, right? And so it's it's amazingly easy to just decide, hey, I'm going to go and do the work to pursue a high earning career and get access to this enormous wealth that you can just get if you I don't know, you go into finance or if you go into software engineering, you just get paid a lot of money. And it's not because people in India can't do it, but for whatever reason, if you're in the United States and you just start to becoming a software engineer, you get paid a ton of money, and that money is can be put to so much effective use in other parts of the world that one of the most effective things you could do, probably even more effective than a lot of direct work of going and directly working for a charity, is to go and work in one of these industries that pays an outsized income and
Exactly.
donate that money to basically have somebody do the work that you might otherwise do, or more people than just yourself would otherwise do working for a nonprofit, right?
Right.
And
Leverage.
so, exactly, leverage.
Yeah.
And so that is the whole idea of earning to give. So when I heard that argument as that potentially being the most effective thing that you could do with your life, I was like, shit, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And that seems like something that I'm uniquely well suited for. So I decided to go and try to pursue a high earning career. And that is actually what motivated me to come into the tech industry. And so all of this was really spurred by the goal of earning to give. And so as soon as I got my first job, which was actually being an instructor at App Academy, I started giving 33% of my pre-tax income to high impact charities. And that is basically my, that's like my North Star, essentially. Like that's what keeps me trying to optimize my career and trying to be aggressive. And it's actually in a way like a lot of what motivated me to negotiate aggressively when I was looking for a new job, because I knew that it's not really about me, it's about the goal that I came out here to accomplish, which is to earn as much money as possible so I can donate as much as possible to help improve the world. Like this to me is something that's sufficiently motivating and also important to actually pursue. Because if it was just about money, the truth is I probably wouldn't care. Like
Exactly.
I'm actually not very motivated by money. And I think it's also, it tends to be true at the very highest levels of most, financially lucrative enterprises, that it's not really about money anymore as the way that most people think it's about money, right? In the sense that the very best hedge fund managers in the world, they don't actually need more money. They don't
Right.
really, in a sense, want more money. What they want is more of the thing that they are motivated by, which is usually prestige or a challenge or being better than somebody else, right? Competition. But the money itself, just I don't know. I think it's amazing how little money buys. Which I think before you actually have money, um, I think many of your illusions will get shattered
Exactly.
once you actually have access to money and you realize, just as a human being, you are not wired to be happy from material things.
Yeah.
It's just like humans are not designed to get happy from material things, and you will fight a very uphill battle if you want to try to make yourself happy through money. But I think there are a lot of other things, such as helping other people or having a meaningful life, that will do a lot to make you happy.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
totally agree with you. Yeah, that very, very much. Again, very similar mindset. There's, Tony Robbins says that, in a lot. I've gone to a lot of his seminars, and he talks about this idea of the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment, and he says that they're really not the same thing. And he
right,
gives, Robin Williams as an example, right? He does this monologue, and he ends it by saying, "And then he fucking hung himself." Right.
right,
And he's talking about how this guy had achieved everything in life. He had all this money, he had all these things, but he
right,
wasn't fulfilled. And that's so critical. And it's funny, I'm reminded of that quote where where they say, money can't buy you happiness, but you have to have enough money to find that out, or like to,
Sure.
and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's kind of true because so many people don't realize, when I made a lot of money, I always wanted to retire and make enough money to passive income. And when I finally reached the point of becoming a millionaire,
Mhm.
I had this sort of existential crisis at that point, because it was like, well, wait a minute. I've been striving so hard for this thing that's
Right.
going to make me happy, and it's what do I do next? What
Exactly.
happens next? And
Yeah.
that's where I started, really changing my life around to my mission now being, the impact that I can make here, helping programmers to have better lives, helping people to discover some of the things in life that are more important than just the
Yeah.
cash. And
Yeah.
it's
No, that's
funny too,
awesome.
like chasing money, you end up finding it's harder to get, right? But
Right. Right.
ironically, when that's not your goal, then money becomes an easy resource
Right.
to achieve,
Yeah.
which is interesting because you can see that in and I also like the idea that you said that effective. It reminds me, what you said reminds me a lot of Rockefeller, if you're familiar with his.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a real good book called Titan that I read, but he
Yeah.
was
Never heard of
very much like, one of the biggest stresses in his entire life was this idea that, like, he had all this money, and it wasn't just, like, he needed to give away a bunch of it, but he was so stressed out because he needed to do it, and he couldn't even effectively administer it, so he
it.
had to, like, find people that could, because he wanted to be as rigorous and effective with giving his money. It
Mhm.
wasn't just enough to just give money. Like, he needed to check him out and make sure that he was being a good steward of what he was giving.
Right.
And
Right.
that's one of the reasons, like you said too, that I donate to, like, my money goes to orphans in India, is because it's
Mm.
like you've got such a power. Like, I have the ability with, giving $50,000 or whatever to, it's like the impact of, I mean, I can change hundreds or thousands of lives dramatically
Yeah.
with that amount. And it's I think it's a great rocket fuel for you to earn more money. It's not it becomes that thing. It's like, the more money I make, the more money that I can give, that I'd love
Right.
to someday give away $1 million a year,
Sure.
to right. And that's
Yeah. And I think that's the
you're
thing too that I think leads to not just happiness, but also a lot more power and resilience
Mhm.
is making it not about you. You
Yeah.
know, like you are actually making it like doing something for yourself is actually one of the worst motivations, really, that you can
Yeah.
have for almost anything. And I think you mentioned Robin Williams. The person who I often make a connection to is Michael Jordan. Where you
All right.
win 5 title rings, right, and then you're just like, what am I even doing? Like, what's the point of this? And like in a way, it is really like the oldest story in human history, right? The Epic of Gilgamesh is about this guy who's king, and he's just like, what do I do now? I'm king.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it's like this is just it's so obviously a part of our machinery to want the shit out of something, finally get it, and to just immediately habituate to it overnight. Then you wake up the next morning and you're king, and it's like, okay, well, what now? Like, you know, it's just kind of background noise now, and if you don't expect that, then it's kind of a rude awakening, right?
Right.
But I think that is a consequence of making it about the achievement. It's making it about, like, I want to get rich so that when I'm a millionaire, I do millionaire things. And it's so funny because you get the exact same thing in poker, where the people who are motivated by money are
Hmm.
almost always the people who fail. They're almost
Exactly.
always the people who do not succeed in poker. And I think that's in part because it makes you much more emotional. It makes you more short-sighted. It makes you make more kind of local decisions rather than like decisions that are optimized for the long run. But it's just, I think it is also that, like, the people who are not motivated by money and they're motivated instead by getting really good or by competition or something other than just making money, they are way more resilient.
Exactly.
And when they get to the next stage, they're like, cool, I'm going to go to the stage after this. And when they get to the next stage, I'm going to go to the stage after that, right? Because there was no point at which the person who wanted to become the best stopped wanting that, or like where they have that need satisfied, right? But the person who just wants money, once they get to, like, 1-2 or 2-4, right? And they're like, oh man, I've got all this money now. Now I can just start spending it, right?
Exactly.
And like there are all these like plateaus, you know. But the person who wants just to be the best, that person is just climbing a straight mountain, you know, and they just know once I get there, I just keep climbing, you know, and once I get above that, I just keep climbing. And
Right.
there's never a point at which you stop climbing, because it wasn't about reaching a point, you know, it was about climbing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That to me, I think is an important difference in motivation between people.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Especially like you said at the poker table, I think, one of the things that like when I crush people's dreams is with, at the 1-2 table, right? Because it's like, oh, I made $300 tonight at the 1-2 table playing for 4 hours, and like, okay, well, that's good. And then I say, okay, but you realize that like if you're beating a game really effectively, you're making 3 big blinds an hour, right? That's a pretty good. Like, your competition has to be pretty bad at a 1-2. Okay. And I mean, maybe you disagree. Maybe it's a little, but regardless of what's 3 or 5 or 1.5 big blinds an hour, let's say it's 3 big blinds an hour. Well, then like, okay, so the math, you realize the math on that, right? Because the big blind is 2. So that's 3 times 2, that's $6 an hour.
Right.
So, so if you're grinding it out effectively and you're beating the game, you should expect to make about $6 an hour. I mean, maybe $10 an hour. Like, but are you going to sit there and make $6 or $10 an hour? Oh no, I can make way more than that. Okay, so you're not prepared emotionally for the deviation that you're going to hit, because you're gonna, you're gonna be up to. You want to make $50 an hour. You're gonna be playing, what is it? You're gonna be playing. Well, actually, you're gonna be playing, 25-50, because then you're only gonna have a small edge. And it's like, if you're thinking about the money, you're not prepared for the journey that you're going to go on. It's going to be a long slog. It has to be more than about the money, because the money is like, it's sickening to think that you would spend that much time to make $6.
Yeah, totally.
All that.
The other thing that I think, yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I think, making the connection to programming, right? I think the best analogy that I can think of is when I was in the coding bootcamp. So this is a cohort of people who are all essentially trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to learn as effectively as possible how to become good programmers and get jobs in industry. And you see just a gamut of motivations, running the entire spectrum. And the thing that you most notice is that the people who are sort of doing this out of fear that they might not be able to get a job are almost always the people who do the worst.
Exactly.
And the people who are just like, I just want to get a job, I just want to get any job, right? They do worse than the people who are like, I want to nail the best possible job that I can get. Like, I want a top tech company. I want to be a badass, right? Like, the second class of people almost always does well. It does better than the first class of people. And, it's not obvious why, but I think one of the big reasons is that it's also like, if you're shooting, if you imagine like, there's this, what's a good example? Like, if you imagine that you're trying to hit this wall, right? You're trying to like throw a ball up high enough to hit this line on the wall, and that line is getting a job, right? If you're aiming for the very, very tip top of that wall, you're just going to develop a much better throw than if you're aiming just to get above the line.
Exactly.
Right? And so if your sights are set on like, I'm going to, get the absolute best job and be the best developer out of anybody in this cohort, right? Those people are going to end up becoming the best, because they're just, when they're swinging their bat, they're aiming for home runs, and everyone else is just aiming to not get out.
Yeah.
That is such a huge difference in just the way that you're training and the way that you're approaching your own development.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it also comes, I mean, it's that fear greed mechanism that we talked about earlier at the poker table. It's like, I remember when because I did both. I drew the parallel between playing poker and trading stocks, and I'd risk in either scenario. I learned from both 2% of my bankroll. And by doing that, I never was afraid, right? Like, it was like, I could play fearlessly, because if you've got 100% of it in there, and you're, if you have $10,000 in your bankroll and you buy in for $10,000, if you put it all into, if you're all in, that your heart is skipping a few beats, right? You're like, But if that represents 2% of your total bankroll, you're like I mean, it's not like you're executing from
Right.
this mindset. And the same thing
Totally.
when you're
Totally.
applying for the job is if it's
Yeah.
like, I gotta get this job,
Yeah.
or like, I just want any job, that either the fear or the greed,
Right.
you end from that place where you're going to perform poorly. But if you're like, well, I've got this plan. Here's what I'm going to do. I want a top tech company. I'm going to apply for, 5 jobs a day. I'm going to execute on this, and
Yeah.
it will take me, it's a numbers game. If I apply for 100 jobs, I'm probably going to get 20 callbacks, and then I'm going to get
Right.
5 interviews, and I
Yeah.
might have 3 offers, and now I'm going to execute this plan.
Right.
Then you're not coming from that place of desperation.
Totally. Totally. I mean, so I know we got to wrap up soon, but one, I guess, nugget of advice that might be useful for some of your listeners that I would often give to a lot of the students at App Academy when I was sort of coaching them on job searches. I mean, I think one of the tough things when you are looking for a job, right, is whenever you go into an interview and you don't have a job, right, like it feels like the stakes are so high. Because if you do well, you have now just built the next stage of your career, and if you do poorly, then screw you, you'll never get a job again, right? Like, so it feels, interviews are designed to be high stakes and intense,
Right.
And I think definitely, having a background as a poker player and dealing with those kind of circumstances helps. But I think the advice that you can leverage to sort of kind of emulate what a poker player essentially does is like treating each interview that you go to and each experience, in the job hunt as purely for learning.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you go into an interview and you're like, actually, it doesn't matter whether or not I get this job. I probably won't get it, but
Right.
I'm just going to learn as much as I can from this experience for the interview that I will nail. Right.
Exactly.
So, like, I don't know whether or not I'll nail this interview, but I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can, and like just take it in as a source of practice, essentially.
Yep.
And what you'll find is that eventually one of your practice interviews, you will land and you will just get the job. Right.
Exactly.
But the important thing is, like, I think the important thing is lowering the stakes,
Yep.
because like you said, when you sit in at a table and you have 100% of your bankroll, of course you're not going to make good decisions, right? Of course you're not going to play good poker. But if you sit in there and you have 2% of your bankroll and almost nothing is really truly on the line, all you're really doing is just gaining information and learning, then you're groovy, you're made.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is one really fundamental difference that you can just start making, is just shifting your perspective on what you're doing when you go into a job interview, right? Never need it. That's what's important. Like, when you go into a job interview, remind yourself that you don't need it. Like,
Right.
you will actually be okay even if you don't get this job.
And that's just solid advice in general. I mean, heck, if you're going to pick up a girl,
Yeah.
right? You don't need, I'm just going to go and have fun, and just, it doesn't matter if I get shot down or not. Right. It's like this whole attitude. In fact, I just had a guy that asked me, that said, he emailed me. He's like, I've been following your advice, John. I got the job interview. He's like, I need your help. This is urgent. He put all caps in the subject line. How am I going to get this job? I need your help. And I replied back to him, and I was like, go in there. And just like you said, I said, learn. I said, expect that you're not getting this one. That's fine. Expect that you're going to need 9 no's. This is your first no. You're going to need 8 more after this, and then you'll get your job. Come in with that expectation. Doesn't mean don't try your best. Do your best. Do the best that you can. Be as pleasant of a person. Try to, do the best that you can. But don't come in it with arrogance or need. Just come in there like, I'm here. If this is a good match, this is great. I'm here to learn. Take notes. Like, figure out what you stumbled on.
Yeah.
And figure out how the next one is going to be slightly better than this one.
Right.
And assume that it's going to take 9 tries. And if you come in with that mindset, maybe you'll get this one and it'll be great. You're going to have a lot higher chance. But if you don't, it's fine, because that's like, you can't put it all on no one operates under that kind of pressure, like with the gun to their head.
Yeah.
A lot of developers too, like they want to quit their jobs and start a startup in something, right? Or something. And I'm like, okay, the worst thing you could possibly do is save up like $50,000, quit your job, and go into Starbucks and think you're going to create your company, being an entrepreneur. Because it's like having a gun to your head, where it's like you're under so much pressure in that case that you're likely to fail, and you're probably going to fail 10 times trying to be an entrepreneur. So give yourself enough chances to do it. Again, I think we could you draw so many parallels to poker. Like if you you have to play a lot of hands,
Sure, yeah,
you
yeah.
can't put it all on one hand. You know,
Well,
it's like,
I somewhat disagree with you on the very last point you made about entrepreneurship. I think it depends. There's definitely a spectrum, right? If it would take you multiple years to build up another reserve of $50,000, depending on like how good you are at saving money,
right,
then I think that's somewhat of a true point. But I think there's also this counterpoint of like it's like what we talked about of burning the boat. You know,
right.
I do think that there is something really valuable there. Where if this is like your only escape hatch is I got to make this startup work. Like I think a principal example of that is Airbnb itself. Where
Okay.
like it just brought out the fact that they had no options but to make the startup work. Like they started selling cereal that was branded from like Obama and McCain right back in 2008, and they just had to make it work. Otherwise, they were the founders were just screwed. And I think that that can bring a lot of hustle out of somebody that isn't easily accessible. That if you're just like working on something on the side, isn't there. Now, that said, I totally agree with you that you should absolutely validate the startup that you want to found from a safe and a low risk place, because you're absolutely right that like chances are any given startup is going to fail, and you want to like fire off as many attempts or sort of as many probes as you can, and know which is actually the highest expectation to be a good startup, and then go embark on it once you actually see, okay, putting up a landing page and some Google ads shows me some traction, so I'm going to like go and start really investing full time in this. That I agree is a good approach, but I think there is also something really valuable in just kind of like throwing away the key and being like, well, shit, I got to make this work now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess there's kind of a contradiction there between burning the boats and then, I think I would say, like, because I agree with what you're saying here. I think the difference for me would be like, if you are used to being a lion in captivity,
Hmm.
you can't burn the boats because you're not a wild animal. Like you've got to burn the boats with smaller things first,
Hmm.
get the confidence in yourself. Like, if someone who has done that before goes and they're like, I have to make this work. They know what it takes. They're
Right.
willing to, like, and then a lot of people I think halfway burn the boats. They set the boats on fire and then they get in the burning boats and try to sail back to home.
They should get on the side of the boat and like try to prevent it from totally capsizing. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like the worst thing that you could possibly do. It's either burn the boats or leave the boats. Like you're either going
Right.
to escape or you're not. But if you set those boats on fire and then get in there, you're definitely, and so many people do that because they're like that line in captivity. They've been working for someone else for such a long time. They've never experienced what it's like to do the thing. And so if you've mastered a few things in life, I think you've got more of that advantage. Whereas, and you're still doing your due diligence, but
Right. Right.
but yeah, I think there's a balance. It's kind of a weird, but life is full of contradictions. I think there is a weird
Yeah.
contradiction here between like, there's some value in just burning the boats, but then there's like, don't step on.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, yeah. Don't throw away your life savings, right? Like that's also a good principle to live by.
Yeah, I guess it's like the gamble. It comes back. Maybe you could look at the EV,
Mhm.
what's your expected value on this move, and if
Yeah.
it's like if positive EV, then burn the boats and let's go and let's put a 100%. But what I found too is that your EV sort of like increases based on how far you're willing to go, how much you're willing to burn the boats. It's
Right.
like the
Right.
person who's that determined, I will eat ramen soup, and like I will sleep on the floor of my friend's
Yeah.
apartment. Like I'm going to that extreme, that their chance of success is greatly increased. Whereas the guy that's like, well, I'm making 120,000 a year, so I'm going to save up 50,000, and hopefully in a year with this new startup I'm doing, I'll be able to replace my $120,000 income salary. So I'm going to go into Starbucks and, well, I don't want to work too much. So I'll go do like 7-hour days, and I got to take the weekends off, and, oh, and I need an office space. So let me spend some money on that. And I better get the highest, best computer that I could, and equipment. That person is like the lion in captivity. Like they're in
Sure.
my mind, they're not ready to burn the boats.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And there's also always opportunity costs that you have to take into consideration, right? So
Yeah.
even if locally it looks like this thing is like, oh, this seems like a good startup idea, this would make me some money. probably true. There are a lot of startup ideas that I think would make some money. But it's a question of like, okay, what if you instead worked for another couple of years, made your normal salary, and potentially moved a little further in your career, but also had that vantage point to see any other opportunities that came along in the next 2 years that might be better.
Right.
And so like you always have to weigh those things against each other, which is another thing that I found. Most people who have not been like poker players or magic players or chess players or something, they just suck at thinking about counterfactuals and opportunity costs. It's for whatever reason, I don't know why, but it's like not something that we train people to think about.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Educated people, and I think it leads to a lot of really large mistakes where people make sort of locally optimal decisions that end up just being worse for their overall trajectory.
Yeah. By the way, if you got to go, just let me know. But
I do think I have to run because I have
okay.
to work. Yeah. But
Okay.
This conversation has been a total pleasure.
Yeah. Same here. I want to give you a chance real quick. If there's anything you want to point someone to visit your site, or if I don't know if you've got a YouTube channel going, or
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at HOSSEEB Haseeb, and you can also read my website. It's haseebq.com. And yeah, if you're interested in any of the stuff that I've written about how to get into tech or the story of my job search, it's all up there on my blog. And yeah, thanks again for having me. This has been really enjoyable.
Yeah, this has been fun, Haseeb. I really appreciate you coming on here. I'm sure maybe we'll have to do this again since we got so much to talk about.
Sure.
But I appreciate it. And yeah, I'll talk to you next time.
All right, it's been real. Take care.